Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking on a subject that is, well, it's incredibly personal, but also clinically rigorous and I think fundamentally hopeful.
It really is.
Our mission is to explore complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or C-PTSD, and we're using this rich, really fascinating stack of sources that combines raw personal narrative with hard psychology and some pretty cutting-edge brain science.
It's an extraordinary set of materials. I mean, it's not just a collection of case studies. It's one person's very detailed journey, and it's all supported by texts like The Body Keeps the Score and the latest research on intergenerational trauma.
So we're really tracing the path from decades of confusion to a single clarifying diagnosis.
Exactly, and that diagnosis was a long time coming.
A very long time. The narrator had suffered from this persistent low-grade depression and acute anxiety since childhood,
Yeah.
but had always just explained it away.
Right, it was either the human condition or maybe just that classic New York neuroticism.
Yeah, they just assumed that feeling constantly on edge and fundamentally defective was just how life was supposed to feel. For everyone.
For everyone. And then after 8 years of therapy, sometimes just seeing the therapist through a tiny computer window, the moment arrived.
And the line was, not just PTSD, complex PTSD.
And that distinction is the bedrock of our whole deep dive today. I mean, traditional PTSD is usually tied to a singular moment of trauma, a bad car accident, say, or a natural disaster.
But C-PTSD is fundamentally different. It's a cumulative burden, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It stems from continual abuse or neglect or chronic trauma over years, often rooted in childhood where there was just no escape.
And for the narrator, having that distinction complex PTSD, it immediately clarified everything. The persistent anxiety, the depression.
It wasn't a flaw. It was a wound that was sustained over a very long time.
And here's a really visceral part, the immediate impact. So the narrator Googles the symptoms.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just this moment of profound, disorienting shock, everything they had internalized as a personal failing.
All those things.
The trouble holding down jobs, relationships, that constant neediness, seeing threats everywhere, the impulsivity, this search for a savior figure.
They weren't moral shortcomings. They were, in fact, listed medical symptoms of C-PTSD.
It's a monumental shift in self-perception, right? For decades, the belief was, I am a bad, broken human being.
And that one Google search revealed, no, you have a traumatized nervous system that is manifesting predictable, observable symptoms. And that distinction, that's the bridge from self-loathing to self-understanding. It's the foundation for all the healing that comes after.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's move beyond the behavior and into the hard science.
Yeah.
The biology. What is it about the repeated nature of this trauma that so fundamentally rewires the body and the brain?
The physical differences are just. They're stark. The sources we looked at leaned heavily on clinical comparisons. There's one major study, it touches on van der Kolk's work, that compared adult victims of childhood abuse, so complex trauma, with victims of a recent singular natural disaster.
And what were the key differentiators? What stood out?
Well, both groups had PTSD, but the childhood abuse survivors had this specific cluster of symptoms that were really rare in the disaster victims. Things like profound trouble concentrating, feeling constantly on edge.
Hypervigilance.
Exactly. And intense self-loathing, severe difficulty with intimate relationships, and significant memory gaps. That right there is the signature of C-PTSD.
So the trauma literally leaves physical scars. It changes their fundamental ability to relate to the world and to themselves. Let's talk about the cellular level first.
Absolutely. One of the most striking biological findings was the effect on telomeres.
Okay, so telomeres are like the little plastic tips on your shoelaces, right?
That's the perfect analogy. They protect the main DNA strand. And what we find is that chronic childhood trauma is linked to significantly shortened telomeres. And when those caps wear down, the DNA is less protected.
Which is linked to aging and disease susceptibility.
It's tied directly to accelerated biological aging. I mean, chronic abuse essentially wears the body out faster.
That's just astonishing. The constant stress literally ages a child at a cellular level. And then you move up to the brain where the trauma visibly rewires the hardware.
It does. We see three main structural changes that really explain those behavioral symptoms. First, the amygdala, that's the brain's fear processor, your internal smoke detector. It's often enlarged. It gets hyper-responsive.
The smoke detector is just ringing constantly, even when there's no fire.
Precisely. It's stuck on the highest sensitivity setting. Second, we see reduced thickness in the prefrontal cortex, the PFC.
The calm, rational CEO of the brain.
That's it. It's responsible for moderation, planning, complex decision-making. So if that part shrinks, it directly explains the impulsivity, the difficulty with regulation, all of it.
And what about the somatosensory cortices? That's not a term you hear every day.
So, the somatosensory cortices register sensation, where you feel things in your body. And we often see them become smaller in C-PTSD survivors.
Which is a physical manifestation of dissociation.
It's very likely, yes. The body, facing this overwhelming, inescapable danger, it learns to just numb out, to leave the body as a survival mechanism. And that's what makes it so hard for survivors to feel grounded or even identify their own emotions later on.
That structural change is so intense. But what I think is even more profound is this idea that the trauma isn't just personal, that it can be passed down.
Epigenetics.
Yeah, let's talk about the generational code.
This is where the science gets truly mind-blowing. So our DNA is the hardware, right? The epigenome is the software. It's this layer of chemical markers on the DNA that acts like a switchboard, telling genes when to turn on or off.
So it's not the memory itself that's inherited, it's the response.
It's the response. It's the adaptation that gets inherited. We see this in the research. There was a study of Holocaust survivors and their children, and it revealed they shared the same epigenetic tags on a specific gene, FKBP5, which helps regulate stress hormones.
So the children, even though they never lived through those horrors, basically started life with their stress switch already set to high alert.
It's staggering. Their bodies arrived pre-programmed for fear. And even more dramatically, there's that famous mouse study. Scientists conditioned mice to fear the scent of cherry blossoms by giving them an electric shock whenever they smelled it.
Okay.
The next generation of mice, who were never shocked, never even smelled the scent before, they still shuddered instinctively when they were first exposed to cherry blossoms.
Wow.
The trauma became part of their inherited code, a necessary, purposeful survival strategy passed down. And the narrator's conclusion after reading this was just so simple and heartbreaking. My body remembers.
That inherited fear. It brings us right back to the narrator's own origin story. And this wasn't just a tough childhood. It was a constant, everyday state of siege.
The anecdotes are chilling. They really illustrate the chronic, unpredictable nature of it all. Like the mother using a red pen to edit the narrator's childhood diary, the diary journal, as it was spelled.
Just covering the pages in fierce red X's and strike-throughs.
And each mark felt like a punch to the chest, followed immediately by the thwack of a plastic ruler on their open palm.
It's not just the physical pain, is it? It's the constant erasure of the child's own reality. Their internal experience being invalidated every single day.
And the emotional manipulation was just as acute. The mother blaming the child for her own suicide attempts with Excedrin overdoses and then threatening to slit my throat if 911 was called.
Which puts a young child in the impossible position of having to monitor their mother's breathing just to make sure she's alive, out of sheer terror.
And then after the divorce, the father's behavior just continues the pattern, normalizing this state of impending disaster through what the narrator called car terrorism.
Yes, during arguments, he'd drive recklessly, threatening to end both of their lives.
Singing that horrifying line, "I'm gonna kill myself because I'm tired of this life and you're a fucking bitch, so you're coming too."
It just normalizes a constant state of impending annihilation. It forces the child into this extreme, hyper-vigilant caretaker role.
And the narrator says it outright. Their primary job as their child was constantly begging their parents to believe they were loved. And after the divorce, I was not a girl. I was his caretaker.
That complete lack of a childhood, that forced role reversal, it's so key to C-PTSD.
What's worse is that the narrator initially believed my story was the same as everyone else's story in their immigrant community. This shared, unspoken burden.
You see this sharp contrast between the facade, the model minority myth, and the hidden truth behind it all.
Absolutely. The teachers saw the main stressor as getting as all down our report card. But the school counselor, Yvonne, she saw a drastically different reality. She reported 230 referrals for issues like incest, major depressive disorders, psychotic episodes, physical abuse.
Her default assumption was that anyone who walked into her office was being physically abused at home.
Yeah. And that pressure to achieve, to get the eyes, it was this desperate collective way to try and wipe away our parents' brutal pasts.
But the parents themselves, through this complex, maybe inherited survival mechanism, they just avoided talking about loss or war or trauma entirely.
That cultural silence, that inability to process the past, just allowed the pain to fester in the next generation. It taught the kids that vulnerability was dangerous.
Which leads us right into the hard, chaotic, nonlinear work of healing. The sources note that the first attempts, things like talk therapy, often fell short. Why was that?
For a lot of C-PTSD sufferers, talk therapy can be, well, useless, or even make things worse. They're either too dissociated to even access the difficult memories.
Or they get so emotionally activated when they do recall the trauma that it just feels like re-traumatization.
Exactly. The narrator mentioned that therapists asking them to logically repeat "the abuse was not my fault" just yielded this empty logical void. The brain understood it, but the body just didn't feel it.
The breakthrough, surprisingly, came from EMDR eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. The narrator was super skeptical of this hokey technique with the buzzers and headphones.
Right, but the power of EMDR, as it's described, is that it bypasses the intellect. It goes straight to the embodied emotional truth. That bilateral stimulation, the alternating buzzers and tones, it seems to help the brain process the trauma while feeling grounded in the present.
So it's not a logical understanding, it's a profound feeling of acceptance.
That's it. It resulted in this deep bodily realization. My parents didn't love me. It's true. And it's okay. That feeling of okayness was the curative step.
Which is the difference between palliative and curative care. And the narrator also talked about the role of regulation techniques, things like yin yoga, grounding exercises.
Right, like counting colors in the room. They were useful for regulating the symptoms, for calming that hyperactive nervous system.
But they were only palliative care versus curative care. They calm the storm, but they don't fix the hole in the ship.
To move toward repair, the narrator started working with a Dr. Jacob Ham, who they nicknamed the Hulk therapist.
The Hulk analogy is so powerful for trauma-informed care.
It is. Ham explained that rage often isn't evil. It's a trauma-informed rage. It's the Hulk Bruce Banner's protective alter ego, desperately trying to protect that vulnerable core self.
So healing isn't about getting rid of the rage.
No, it's about making friends with the Hulk, thanking it for trying to protect you and letting it know that the danger is gone now.
And Ham provided a critical lesson for relationships. The core insight was, it's not the fights that matter, it's the repairs.
And that's so important for C-PTSD patients who struggle with intimacy. The goal isn't just self-regulation in a vacuum. It's reconnecting with others using curiosity.
Shifting the focus outward.
Yeah, so instead of defaulting to that shame-based "have I hurt you?", the trauma survivor's instinct, you learn to ask what is hurting you. That curiosity instead of defensiveness is the key.
This clarity then allowed the narrator to take the painful but necessary step of estrangement from their family, and they stressed that it was not freeing or joyful.
No, it was just necessary. Necessary to create the space to rebuild their identity and finally accept that their parents' conditional love would never be earned.
And this whole journey culminates in this beautifully simple act of love at her wedding. Joey's family embraces her unconditionally, telling her, "We're your family now, you're ours."
And in his vows, Joey promised to live his love most days and emphasized that to be known by you touches me wholly. That unconditional witnessing provided the external stability for the narrator to finally cultivate true self-love.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? We end this deep dive with this surprising idea that C-PTSD isn't just a list of deficits, that the survival mechanisms you develop can actually transform into powerful assets.
This comes from the research of a neuroscientist, Greg Siegel, and he challenged that old assumption that trauma always shuts down logic. He found that for some C-PTSD patients under intense stress, the opposite happens. The prefrontal cortex, that rational CEO, becomes more active.
Leading to hyperrationality and intense focus.
Exactly. And he coined this unforgettable acronym for it: Blunted and Discordant Affect Sensitivity Syndrome, or BADASS.
Badass. I love it.
It's an incredibly adaptive coping skill. It cuts off that internal feedback loop of getting anxious about getting anxious. So instead of spiraling into panic, the C-PTSD survivor's brain enters this super-focused state.
It's a survival skill for those who learned early that running away has never been an option.
Right. And this explained why the narrator found herself thriving in the apocalypse during the pandemic, feeling productive and calm while others were melting down.
That reframing is essential, turning what was a liability into a survival skill set. And that realization shifted the very definition of healing. It's not about striving for perfection, for some final static peace.
No, it became about achieving fullness and agency. Healing means every emotion: anger, pain, peace, love. It all feels appropriate to the situation. And crucially, the suffering, that paralyzing shame associated with the pain, is finally gone.
So, to summarize this profound deep dive, we went from defining C-PTSD to understanding its deep biological roots, realizing the body remembers trauma through epigenetics and neurological stars.
And we saw that healing involves bypassing the intellect with tools like EMDR, rebuilding relationships through curious repair, and finding hidden strengths in the very mechanisms that kept you alive.
That central tension remains, though. The body holds the code of generations of trauma. Those scars are biological.
But we now have the tools for what the sources call emotional disarmament, the ability to see things realistically, clearly, without the confusion and distortion of fear or rage.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you. Given the science of epigenetic inheritance, the Thor suggests that the specific qualities you possess, your intense work ethic, your hypervigilance, your powerful instincts, they might not be random.
They could be part of an inherited code, gifted to me with purpose, with necessity.
So, what intense fear or perceived personal flaw are you carrying today that you might mistakenly see as just a flaw, but is actually the echo of an ancestor's necessary, purposeful survival strategy? That is the next level of self discovery.